Thanks for staying with us. A look at what's been happening in Ukraine over the last couple of hours. Russian forces are attacking positions along the entire 300-mile, that's 480-kilometer front line in the eastern Donbas region. It comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that a long-awaited Russian offensive in the east has begun. Meanwhile, the Luhansk regional administrator Serhiy Hadai has urged locals to evacuate immediately from the region as Russian forces continue their assault. Earlier, he said 50 people had been evacuated from the eastern cities of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and taken to safety.
Indeed posted today that everyone will be taken out. Ukrainian troops have left the city of Kreminna in eastern Ukraine and taken up new positions, and also it's a race against time to get supplies to Donbas. Despite the focus on the eastern offensive, Russian forces also struck several cities across the country in recent days, including Lviv in the west. Russian-backed fighters are also reportedly trying to storm an industrial complex in Mariupol, where Ukrainian troops and civilians are said to be holed up. Meanwhile, south of Kharkiv, Ukrainian forces are making some successful counterattacks, and this is coming from military analysts.
Here's more on the situation on the ground.
Is now initiating a new phase of what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. Russia Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today said it's another stage of the operation in eastern Ukraine. Echoing comments from the Ukrainian president and senior officials on Monday that Russian forces launched a new offensive push along most of Ukraine's eastern flank and that the Battle of Donbas has now begun. In President Zelensky's video address, the Russian forces have started the Battle of the Donbas, for which they have long prepared. Meanwhile, overnight, Russian missiles and artillery forces struck 1,260 targets in Ukraine. Russian Defense Ministry also said Russian anti-aircraft forces downed the Ukrainian MiG-29 jets in the Donetsk region. The Ukrainian military side, through its spokesman, said that the Ukrainian army has repelled 7 attacks by Russian army in Donetsk and Luhansk region as Moscow launched an anticipated offensive in eastern Ukraine. A military spokesman for General Staff of the Armed Forces said Russian forces had dispatched further weapons and military equipment to Ukraine. The Ukrainian officials have described Russian forces in their offensive in eastern Ukraine as attempting to push through defenses along almost the entire front line Tuesday. Elsewhere, drone footage released has showed a large plume of smoke rising from the Azovstal steel plant, the main remaining Ukrainian stronghold in Mariupol. The footage, published by Mariupol City Council, showed large-scale destruction in the plant, which contains mirrored buildings, blast furnaces, and rail tracks. Been trying to take full control of the southeastern port city of Mariupol, which has been besieged for weeks, and which would be a huge strategic prize, linking territory held by pro-Russian separatists in the east with the Crimea region that Moscow annexed in 2014.
Joining us now is lawyer and counterterrorism expert John Essing. He joins us now from London. John, thank you for joining us on the program.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Russian forces have launched a new offensive push along most of Ukraine's eastern flank. They started that yesterday, and the Battle of Donbas has begun. How heated do you think this could get?
This is what Putin had been planning for all through the COVID period. When the COVID-19 hit, he isolated himself. He's been planning for this. He planned initially to surprise Ukraine and take the whole of Ukraine within a couple of days, and to essentially surprise the West, so he can present it to the West as a fait accompli, if you will, that there was no point defending Ukraine, but he failed. Now he wants to try and take the Donbas region so he can save face, so at least he can have something to show to his constituents back home, because he's been lying to them a lot. And Ukraine, on its part, knows that it has to do everything possible to defend Donbass, because if they take the Donbass, then it is essentially cuts Ukraine economically of the rest of the world, because that's the Mariupol is actually linked to Donbass to the south, to the Crimea, the Crimea Peninsula to the south, and to Donetsk and Luhansk to the east. So what he wants to do is actually cut a straight line through Mariupol, so that so that Luhansk and Donetsk in the east can have a straight line, a supply line all the way through to the Crimea Peninsula and then to the Black Sea. So if he's allowed to do that, then it essentially cuts Ukraine off any supplies of its goods, because a third of the landmass, fertile land in all of Europe, one third of it, approximately 30%, is in Ukraine, which explains why Ukraine is arguably the largest producer of corn, of barley, and of wheat. So if, for instance, if the price of bread in Nigeria has risen, it's as a result of a lack of sufficient supply. That's how important Mariupol is. So, and I know that the Ukrainians are going to do everything to defend it. And even the what's going on in Mariupol at the moment is, even though they know they might eventually lose Mariupol, but it's symbolic for everyone else, every other soldier in the east, to just take some moral boost from that and defend the Donbass as much as they can.
Well, speaking of Mariupol, some of the Russian-backed rebel forces in that region claim that they have taken, the last stronghold in Mariupol, which is there's a small industrial hub over there that they claim that they have taken over. But let's look at another issue now, which is, there's been a report about Ukrainian forces attacking the small town near the border, on the Russian side, near the border with Ukraine. If that is proven to be true, and I know Ukraine is denying this, but if that's proven to be true, how could that change the dynamics of this war?
If that happens, then it'll be the only real success for Russia since this war began, because even the Mariupol we are talking about, as of today, it's still not been taken. They gave them, the Russians gave the military 2 hours to vacate sometime this afternoon, but they're still holding on. And because there are lots of tunnels under the steel mill, and they've been there for about 8 years, so they know the terrain inside out. Russia is going to find it very difficult to dislodge them. So, but if what you're saying is true, then it wouldn't be much of a loss to Ukraine, because that when Putin set out and launched his initial attack, that wasn't one of his main considerations. He still hasn't been able to succeed.
Yeah, but we're also talking about, sorry to cut in here, but we're also talking about, the report about, that small town near the Russia-Ukraine border that has been hit. Ukraine denies attacking the town, but Russian forces are blaming Ukraine, for that attack. Now, if it is true that, Ukrainian forces did hit the town, how could that change, this war?
To begin with, if Ukrainian forces hit the town, I don't see why they're denying, because that's supposed to encourage them anyway. Russia has probably done that to put Ukraine in a bad light and to gain favor from its constituents back home, so it can give it an excuse, maybe to launch, and this is something I hadn't considered until now, maybe to possibly launch a tactical nuclear attack, or maybe even a chemical attack. If that is the case, then I think the West should be very wary. I think it should maybe try and restore deterrence and prevent Russia from planning what I think is either a tactical nuclear attack or a chemical attack. because that may well be Russia doing that. This man does not care whether it's his people who fall victim to this, or or the Ukrainians. He's been wasting Russian lives as much as he's been the Ukrainians. So I suspect that this is a false flag, and he's going to act on it because he's getting desperate. So what the West has to do is ensure that he knows that if under any circumstances he uses either a nuclear weapon, either a tactical nuclear weapon or a chemical weapon, that the response does not have to be measured and it does not have to be proportionate. If he thinks he's using a tactical weapon because he thinks the response will be proportionate, will be measured, or will be retaliatory, he has already built in that calculus into his response, so he's ready for that. So he must understand that it does not need to be, the levels do not need to be the same. The West does not have to respond the way he has advocated the initial attack. He needs to know that, because there has to be, this is an opportunity to restore deterrence if that has happened. Because if no one says anything, if anyone looks at it on face value, then he's going to go ahead and do it. And for a long time, the West has been, thinking of this war as if it's some optional intervention, because taking the countries individually, they can't see it really impact their national security interests.
Let me jump in here.
This is the time.
Let me jump in here. I just wanted to jump in. You're talking about how heated things could really get, especially with the concentration in the East. But if we have, Ukraine saying, this is the battle for Donbass, and then we have Russia saying they're bulking up forces in the East and they're getting ready to go. Based on what either sides, based on what they have, what they've prepared for this war and to take Donbass, who do you think will win? If Russia wins, do you think this would end the war, the invasion in Ukraine?
That's a good question. To begin with, I don't think Russia will win this. Now, it's easy to assume on the face of it that Russia may, because they have overwhelming superior conventional capabilities. They probably have a numerical advantage with regards to the military. But the basic fundamental essence of winning a war is the will to fight. If you do not have the will to fight, it doesn't matter what else you have. That can gain you sporadic wins of battles, but winning a war takes the will to fight, and it doesn't have that. Besides, we have seen that this Ukrainian forces have been able to demonstrate over the last 8 weeks that it has tactical resilience, it has operational flexibility. That theater is its own terrain. It understands it properly. Russia is just visiting there, and its morale has been hit hard, especially with it not losing its flagship a few days ago. And the weapons that are being supplied to Ukraine at the moment, if they've made their way to the east, that's something else I'm concerned about. If they've made their way to the east, then where they are actually needed, because they come to Lviv in the west, which is about 40 miles from the border to Poland, and then they're coming from Poland, and then from Lviv they're taken to the east. And since Lviv has been bombed a few times in the last couple of days, I'm hoping that some of those weapons have not been damaged to the degree that they're useless. But if those weapons that they need are in the east, Russia will have a hard time penetrating them, much less, being able to win this. So you asked me for my opinion. I don't think that Russia has what it takes to win the war on Donbass.
That's the first time I think I've heard that. An analyst saying Russia does not have what it takes to win the war in Ukraine. John Essing, thank you so much for speaking with us. Appreciate your thoughts and your analysis.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Well, residents of Sloviansk have voiced their faith in the Ukrainian army today as Russian soldiers advance towards their own town. Russia launched its long-awaited all-out assault on East Ukraine, unleashing thousands of troops in what Ukraine has described as the Battle of the Donbass, a campaign to seize 2 provinces and salvage a battlefield victory. Ukrainian officials insist their troops would withstand the new assault, which they say began overnight with massive Russian artillery and rocket barrage and attempts to advance across almost the entire stretch of the Eastern Front. Well, in the eastern town of Sloviansk, 2 residents said they would not leave their homes as air raid sirens echoed in the streets. Well, they said, compared to other cities, it still stood good there. A lot of people have moved out. The city's empty. You can see it yourself. Sirens are on all the time. You can hear some explosions, but the town is intact, they say. Another resident also says he still has faith in the Ukrainian army.
Well, almost 5 million Ukrainians have fled the war since Russia's invasion. The United Nations says in the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Women and children make up around 90% of those who have fled. Men aged 18 to 60 are eligible for military call-up and are unable to leave the country. Almost 2/3 of all Ukrainian children have been forced from their homes, including those still inside the country. This is from the United Nations. More than 2.8 million Ukrainian refugees are now in Poland. The UN Refugee Agency figures shows nearly 645,000 Ukrainians fled in February, with nearly 3.4 million doing so in March and 945,000 leaving so far this month, April. UN spokeswoman told reporters in Geneva that the key is that the borders remain open, people can access safety, and when they get to neighboring countries, they have access to assistance. Other countries which have accepted Ukrainian refugees are Romania, the Russian Federation, Hungary, the Republic of Moldova, Slovakia, and Belarus.
Well, car maker Stellantis, which produced and sold the Peugeot, Citroën, Opel, Jeep and Fiat brands in Russia, has announced it is suspending production as its Russian plant due to logistical difficulties and sanctions imposed on Moscow hit. Stellantis is the world's 4th largest automaker with just 1% of the car market in Russia. Well, it ran a plant in Kaluga, some 125 miles off Moscow, with Japanese car maker Mitsubishi. That was before it halted production there in April. A statement from Stellantis said, given the rapid daily increase in cross-sanctions and logistical difficulties, Stellantis has suspended its manufacturing operations in Kaluga to ensure full compliance with all sanctions, all cross-sanctions, and to protect its employees. Scores of foreign companies have announced temporary shutdowns of stores and factories in Russia. Or they say that they're leaving the country for good since Russia began what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine. And that began on February 24. Stay with us, coming up after the break. Well, still looking ahead to the second round of polls in France on Sunday. President Macron casts himself as a last defense against far right as the vote nears.